Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I, 29 female, used to think family meant everything, but life has taught me otherwise. My mother was what you'd call a joy vampire. She'd suck the happiness out of everything, especially when it came to celebrations. My childhood memories are filled with her scoffs and eye rolls whenever I showed excitement about holidays. I remember when I was 12, I spent weeks making handmade Christmas decorations for our living room. The morning I planned to put them up, I overheard my mother in the kitchen complaining to my father about how tacky my decorations were, asking why I couldn't just be normal like my brother. My father, ever the peacekeeper, just sighed and told her to let me have my fun, suggesting I'd grow out of it. My mother shot back that I was embarrassing them and worried about what people would think when they came over. I quietly packed away my decorations that day and never brought them out again. That's just one example of many. My brother, 3 years older than me, learned early on to keep his head down and go with the flow. He became the good child while I was labeled the difficult one for simply wanting to celebrate special occasions. As I grew older, the emotional distance between my mother and me grew into a chasm. Every attempt I made to bridge it was met with criticism or indifference. 3 years ago, after a particularly nasty argument, I finally cut contact with her. When I told her I was done being her emotional punching bag and that I deserved better, she dismissed me by saying this was exactly why nobody could stand being around me. I fired back that maybe I learned to be dramatic because it was the only way to get any attention in this family. That was the last conversation we had. My father still calls me regularly, trapped in his role as the eternal mediator, never taking sides but always trying to keep the peace. It's exhausting watching him bend over backwards to avoid confrontation. 2 years ago, my brother's marriage fell apart. His ex-wife got their house in the divorce settlement, and that's when things really changed. Our parents bought a duplex in his state, creating this perfect little family unit with him and my 4-year-old niece on one side and them visiting on the other. Suddenly, the family that didn't do holidays started celebrating Christmas together, without me. Last Christmas, I discovered their celebration through my father's Facebook post. This year, the knife twisted deeper. On Christmas Eve, my father called me in my new city, where I'd moved for work. He gushed about what a wonderful time they were having as a family and asked what I was doing for Christmas. When I pointed out that I was alone in a new city while my family celebrated without me, he got uncomfortable and quickly made an excuse about dinner, being ready to get off the phone. Hours later, he sent a group selfie with everyone smiling, captioned "Merry Christmas from Brother's State." That was the last straw. I stopped responding to his calls and texts. A week passed and his messages grew increasingly worried. He begged me to let him know if I was okay, then sent another message saying he was getting really worried and just needed to know I was alive. Finally, I decided to respond, but not in the way he expected. I created a public social media post, something I rarely do. In it, I called out how some parents could buy a duplex in another state to be close to one child, but couldn't even extend a holiday invitation to another. I pointed out the irony of them worrying about me being alive after a week of no contact, but never worrying about my mental health after years of exclusion and emotional neglect. I ended by reassuring others spending the holidays alone that they weren't the problem. Sometimes the family that excludes you is. The post went viral in our small community. Mutual friends and extended families started reaching out, sharing their own stories of feeling excluded by my mother's behavior over the years. My brother finally called me. He apologized, saying he never realized how bad it was for me and that he should have seen it sooner. I assured him it wasn't his fault, explaining that we were both just trying to survive her in our own ways. Then he surprised me by inviting me to stay with him next Christmas, on his side of the duplex, under his rules. He said our mother could deal with it or stay home. It wasn't the perfect Hollywood ending where my mother suddenly changed and my father grew a backbone. But it was something better. It was real. My brother finally saw the truth. and I gained the confidence to stop chasing the approval of people who would never give it. Ever since we moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago, my son had trouble fitting in. He's always been a bit different, quiet, loves reading, and prefers chess over sports. The local kids, especially the ones from the wealthy families, never let him forget that he wasn't part of their clique. My husband and I tried our best to make things work. We chose this area because of the good schools, even though it meant stretching our budget thin. My husband's been in the trucking business for over 15 years, running his own small operation. He's helped countless fellow truckers and tow truck operators out of tight spots, never asking for anything in return. That's just the kind of person he is. The incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home when I heard distant screaming. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just kids playing, until something in my gut told me something was wrong. The screams were coming from behind the local convenience store. I rushed over to find a group of middle school kids running away, laughing. My blood ran cold when I realized the screams were coming from inside the dumpster. The lid was shut tight and someone had wedged a stick through the handle to keep it closed. I called out to whoever was inside, telling them to hold on and that I was getting them out. The screams turned into sobs. It was my son. A store employee helped me get the dumpster open. My son was terrified, covered in garbage, and had a cut on his forehead from being pushed in. Through his tears, he explained that 3 boys from his school, led by Karen's son, had ambushed him while he was walking home. I called the police and took my son to the emergency room. While we were there, Karen showed up with her son and his friends. She immediately started yelling, demanding to know how I dared to call the police on her baby. She tried to dismiss the whole thing as boys being boys and claimed they were just playing. I shot back that trapping my son in a dumpster wasn't playing. Karen scoffed and suggested that my son had probably climbed in there himself for attention, insisting that her son would never do such a thing. She then tried to intimidate me by asking if I knew who she was in the community. I told her that I didn't care who she was and that her son and his friends could have killed mine. Karen dismissed my concerns as dramatic and then made a thinly veiled racist comment about how our kind doesn't belong in the neighborhood anyway. The police took statements, but Karen's influence in the community was evident. The boys got away with just a warning and the school gave them detention for a week. Karen even came to our house later, demanding we drop the whole thing and threatening to make our lives difficult if we pursued it further. That evening I told my husband everything. He didn't say much, just listened quietly while cleaning his hands after working on one of his trucks. The next day, he made some phone calls to old friends. 2 days later, Karen's pride and joy, a brand new luxury SUV and a sports car, disappeared from in front of her house. The police found no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, nothing. It was as if the cars had vanished into thin air. Karen was livid. She went door to door accusing everyone of theft. She even tried to blame us, but the police found nothing suspicious. Her insurance company gave her the runaround for weeks. 3 weeks later, a fishing boat found both cars at the bottom of the lake outside town. They were completely ruined, filled with water, mud, and even some fish had made themselves at home inside. The police investigation turned up nothing. No witnesses, no evidence of how they got there. Nothing. Karen moved away a month later. Apparently, her insurance refused to pay, claiming there was evidence of deliberate submersion. She couldn't afford to replace the cars and couldn't handle the whispers and stares from the neighbors who'd grown tired of her entitled attitude. She was living with her parents in another state. Her son switched to a private school, and his friends suddenly became model citizens. My husband never said a word about it, but sometimes when we drive past the lake, he gets this tiny smile on his face. His trucker friends still come by for barbecues, and occasionally they'll look at the lake and chuckle among themselves. I never ask questions. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I've been dealing with email mix-ups for as long as I can remember. Having a common Spanish name means my email address, which is just my first name.last name at Gmail, apparently looks like everyone else's email with a similar name. The only difference? Their middle names, which they somehow forget, exists when typing email addresses. Over the years, I've received everything from bank statements to utility bills and even wedding invitations meant for other people. I always try to be nice about it, replying to let them know they've got the wrong person, but most of the time they either ignore me or just keep sending stuff anyway. But this one company, oh boy, this was different. It started about 10 years ago when I began receiving their internal documents. At first, it was just meeting notes, then spreadsheets, and eventually full-on presentations. I tried the nice approach, sending them a polite email explaining that I believed there had been a mix-up and that I wasn't an employee of their company. I suggested they might want to double-check the email address. Did they listen? Of course not. The emails kept coming and coming and coming. Then one day I received an invitation to join their group chat. Now this was using some old Google Chat product that doesn't even exist anymore. Most people would probably just ignore it. But after months of being bombarded with their documents, I thought, you know what? Let's have some fun with this. I joined their chat and they were all discussing some customer project. The team lead asked what everyone thought about the client's request for the new feature. I jumped in and suggested we should paint it purple, explaining that customers love purple. When the project manager requested an update on the timeline, I responded by stating that according to my calculations, it should take approximately 3.14 years, give or take a pizza. At first, they seemed confused but kept going. Then I started getting more creative. I asked if they had considered implementing time travel, claiming I'd heard it was very popular in the market right now. The senior developer questioned what I was talking about, so I apologized and explained I thought we were brainstorming. Then I asked if anyone had seen my pet unicorn, who was supposedly working on this project. The chat went dead silent. That's when I decided to drop the bomb. I pointed out how funny it was that none of them had bothered to check if they were sending documents to the right email address. I reminded them that I'd been telling them for months that I wasn't their employee. I added that at least their pet unicorn now knew all about their super secret project. They kicked me from the chat immediately, but I wasn't done yet. I still had access to all their shared documents, so I started editing the titles. Q4 project timeline became Dear Diary. Today I learned about email verification. Client meeting notes transformed into a guide to double-checking email addresses. Budget forecast was renamed to Why You Should Really Make Sure You're Sharing with the Right Person. They weren't tech-savvy enough to revoke my access. I could see them changing the titles back, only for me to change them again. This went on for 2 weeks, with me getting increasingly creative with my title choices. Important presentation became Email 101, a beginner's guide. Confidential data turned into not so confidential when you share it with strangers. Finally, after 2 weeks of this back and forth and probably causing several headaches in their IT department, I decided to end my reign of chaos. I removed all the documents from my drive and never heard from them again. This wasn't even the first or last time something like this happened. I've played this game with at least 3 other companies over the years. You'd think people would learn about email verification by now. But nope. Though I have to admit none of the other instances were quite as entertaining as my 2-week stint as a chaos-inducing unicorn enthusiast in their project management team. After working in real estate development for 8 years, I finally saved enough to buy my own place. The market was tough, and properties in good locations were either way overpriced or got snatched up immediately. That's when my real estate agent showed me this peculiar townhouse. It was wedged between commercial buildings in the busiest part of town. At first, I thought it was strange, a residential property surrounded by restaurants and shops. But the price was right, and it came with something rare in this area, private parking space. The property extended all the way to the back street, with a decent-sized parking area secured by a chain-link gate. The previous owner had moved out of state and was eager to sell. I did my due diligence, checked all the paperwork, and everything was legitimate. The parking area was definitely part of my property. There were even no parking signs already installed when I bought it. The first week was great. Then the problem started. I came home one day to find a car blocking my gate. I couldn't get into park. I called the towing company, but the owner showed up while I was waiting. I told them they couldn't park there because it was private property. They brushed me off, saying they were just picking up takeout from the Chinese restaurant and would only be a few minutes. When I pointed out the clearly posted no parking signs, they just shrugged and said they were leaving anyway. This became a daily occurrence. Sometimes I'd find cars parked inside my space if I left the gate open for even a few minutes. One day I came home to find 3 cars parked in my yard. I had to park on the street and walk home with all my groceries. The final straw came last week. I had an important early morning meeting, but someone had blocked my gate all night. The towing company couldn't come until later, and I ended up being late for work. That's when I started considering a more direct approach. I installed security cameras and added more signs, including one with the towing company's number. Still, people kept parking there. Then yesterday, it happened. A woman in an expensive SUV pulled up and parked right in front of my gate while I was doing yard work. I immediately told her she couldn't park there. She dismissed my warning, saying she'd only be a minute because she needed to get her hair done. When I suggested she use the public parking lot around the corner, she became indignant, asking if I knew how much she paid for her hair appointments and declaring she wouldn't walk in the heat. Then she just walked away, completely ignoring me. That's when I decided to do it. I closed and locked the gate, went inside, and waited. 30 minutes later, my security camera caught her return. She started screaming immediately, demanding to know who had locked the gate and ordering someone to open it. I watched through my window as she called the salon, trying to get them to find the owner of what she called this stupid gate. Finally, she called the police. When the officer arrived, I went outside with my property documents and security footage. The officer explained to her that this was private property and the signs were clearly posted. She tried arguing that I couldn't legally trap her car there, but the officer told her that she was actually trespassing and was lucky I hadn't pressed charges. She became even more furious, demanding that the officer make me open the gate. I told her I would open it right after she paid the towing company that was on its way. She had to pay the towing company's call-out fee, even though they hadn't actually towed her car yet. The officer stayed until she left and gave me his card in case of future incidents. Since then, I've caught several people reading the signs and deciding to park elsewhere. The security cameras have recorded only 2 more attempts to park in my space, but both cars left quickly when they realized the gate was locked. I've started keeping detailed records of every incident, complete with security footage. The officer advised me that this documentation could be useful if anyone tries to challenge my right to control access to my property. I'm just glad I finally found a solution that works, even if it took a bit of creativity to get there. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.